So
Well, should
I
we
don't know
get
if you want to
started,
wait.
John?
Are you gonna? Do you want me to just get started?
Well, I'll do a quick little introduction to get
Okay,
things,
yeah, that works.
started. So hello and welcome. I'm Jen McTague, the co-founding executive director here at Second State Press. And we are so excited to be here in John Woolsey's studio. Currently on view down at Second State Press, we have a show called Woodcuts, Straight Up and Restructured. And John, who has a history or a background in both biology and art, has been working incorporating prints into his painting practice and taking all of these prints and finding new ways to repurpose them and use them. So we're really excited to be here in his studio where he explains a little bit of his process and kind of gives us an inside look into how some of these incredible works are created. I just want to, with two quick notes. One, this is going to be recorded and we will share a version of this online on our website for future viewing. And also, I just want to say a special thank you to the Penn Treaty Special Services District for helping to provide funding to do these virtual studio events. So without further ado, here is John, the artist.
I'm going to go around on the other side of my table here. So here we are in my in the studio I share with my wife Betty, who's been doing a lot of embroidery at home. So I basically took over her space, at least for now, until she comes and kicks me out. I called this presentation the printmaker's dilemma. What do you do with all those multiples? And that came about from sort of being dragged kicking and screaming into printmaking when I was in grad school and was required to spend one afternoon a week in the print shop. And I said, well, what do I want to make things that I can make, 10, 20 of them, they'll just sort of pile up. And I very quickly kind of changed my tune when I was introduced to Hitoshi Nakazato, who was the master printer there, and ultimately became a professor of printmaking. And he gave me a lot of pointers about how to use prints as a way of developing the imagery in my paintings. So one thing that we started doing pretty much right away was that I would cover plates. He introduced me to etching first of all, and I would put resist on the plates and take them out into the landscape. At the time, I was doing a lot of plein air painting studies for my bigger works, and I took the plates out into the landscape and did drawings on them, and then bit them and printed them in the studio. And then I started, well, step back for a second. At the time, I was doing a lot of paintings where I was painting it as, in essence, the same painting 3, 4, 5 times and trying out different kinds of color situations with them. And so, he said, John, you could just be using your prints to do that, and so bingo, up came the idea of, which isn't all that radical, of hand coloring prints. And so I started doing that kind of work. And among the first ones I did were actually, well, I did a bunch in grad school that I'm not sure I want to show to anybody. But right after grad school, I took a trip to the west for Colorado, Utah, Wyoming for a few weeks. And I did a lot of paintings out there, and I did a lot of drawings. And among the first things that I did was from a drawing was this print called Green River Spring. It's a small print, as you can see. And I colored different versions of it. And so I think over the course of working on this print, I probably did about 10 different variations. Blue skies, gray skies, sunset, sunrise, nighttime, all kinds of different situations. So I really got into doing that kind of thing with working on plates. That plate was done in the studio from a drawing, but this plate was done outdoors in our local botanical, arboretum, the Morris Arboretum. And I was trying at the time, not only, things that had a fairly, kind of normal, if you'd call it, color situation, but I was trying monochrome things, in this case, kind of a gray green, and I was trying things in gray blues and other sorts of situations, which I was also exploring in my painting at the time. So from that, actually, could I get you to put these prints over on that white table, please? From that, I started working on large size prints, and I had taken a trip to Scotland in the summer of 1976, where I did a number of paintings as well as drawings, and it of course took a lot of photographs. So using that material, I created a number of etchings and aquatints. This is an etching and spit bite aquatint. One version. This is another one. I was very interested in sort of the combinations of purple and green at the time. And still another one, going more to a kind of gray green palette. Still another. And still another one where I was sort of exploring yellow greens against violet. So those were kind of different ways of exploring. Oh, go ahead. Color situations. I had an exhibition of these hand-colored prints here in Philadelphia at the Gross McLeaf Gallery, I think in 1976 or 77, and then I had an exhibition of essentially the same show at the Madison Art Center in Madison, Wisconsin, the next year. While I was in the West, I visited the Badlands of South Dakota. One of the participants in this show and tell is Tom Santonio, and he and I took a painting trip to the Badlands. But I think that was in 1981, right? Tom, was that? You remember? And at any rate, I think this was from an earlier trip. Here I was experimenting more with the print as a print, and so I was printing the print from the single plate in two colors, blue at the top and black at the bottom, and then doing sort of a minimal amount of hand coloring in the image.
John, we have that print.
You do, that's right.
So that was before we went.
This is before we, that's what made you go. Another kind of version of the same thing, this time hand colored more extensively, but in rather than doing a lot of modeling of the colors in particular areas, I treated each color more as a flat piece of color. And finally, I said, how about pastel? So, it was just like these sort of conceptual ideas about how to deal with color and that was carrying over into my painting too. So I was doing at the time a lot of paintings of the Scottish landscapes, and they had titles sort of like Whistler's titles of studying gray, black, and white or whatever. Mine were things like violet, green, and white lake on sky. So they were sort of straight up looking at how to use color in different ways. Sometime around 19, I think it was a little after, so I finished, I got my MFA in 1973, and I continued at the courtesy of Hitoshi to work in the print studio at the University of Pennsylvania, which was a wonderful resource for me. And I continued to do that probably through about 1987, when for various reasons it no longer became available to me. But in the late 70s, I came up with the idea of doing relief etchings. And that came about because Hitoshi and I, and very often some of the students at Penn, would go to visit the prints at the Rosenwald collection, which was then up in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. It's now been, it was transferred to the National Gallery, I think sometime in the 80s when Lessing Rosenwald died. But you could go up there, and he was this old guy, and he collected this fabulous collection of prints. And he would say, "So what do you want to see?" He said, "Bring me the Rembrandts, bring me the Whistlers. I want to see 10 Fighting Men by Palaioolo." But one of the things that he had was a collection of prints by William Blake. Is that right, William Blake? The poet, the Romantic poet, who was also a very noted artist. And one of the techniques that he used was relief etching, in which he would etch a plate fairly deeply and then print it as a relief print. So I said, "Oh, that's a really interesting idea." So I started doing relief etchings, which it turned out were remarkably easy to do. And so this is one of the early ones. This is, I did in 74, and I have a 74, then 77, which means I did the print in 74 and colored it in 1977. This was done, this was a view of the conservatory at Longwood Gardens, and clearly you can't go out and sit there with a plate on your lap and do a drawing. So it was done from photo reference. And one of the nice things about this technique is that because the paper doesn't have to be soaked, you can print on virtually any paper that won't completely stick to the ink on the plate. So this is a thin charcoal paper. And here's another version. Pardon, I didn't,
You didn't put ink in the etch. Like,
no, what you do is just roll it on and with a very hard roller.
Yeah.
What's weird for like relief etching as opposed to like carving?
Well, for relief etching, all you do is you paint resist on the
Right.
plate, and you can either scratch into it or just paint it on the
Right, it's more
plate.
like a drawing.
Yeah, it's really like a drawing. So it's very painterly because you're
Yeah,
working with a brush and the resist, which is kind of just like, working with watercolor or with oil paint. It's kind of technical, but one of the issues with relief etching is that of course the acid, at that time we were using nitric acid, all these horrible things you don't find in studios anymore, but the acid not only bites down into the plate, but it bites sideways. And so you would have to bite the plate a little bit and then take it out and painstakingly paint everything again. At least small details that are surrounded by white. And then you would have to do it again. You might have to do that 3 or 4 times to get it deep enough in the white area so that they wouldn't print. I came up with a solution to that later on. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed this third version. Printed on a darker green paper. Also, on some of the darker colored papers, you can of course use watercolor that's got some white in it, some gouache, body color as they call it, so that you can work with colors that are lighter than the paper. That sort of opened up another possibility. Put this one aside for a minute. So then I started a whole batch of relief etchings. Let me get the first one. This is the first one I did, which was from a painting. I had done a painting in this scene of a woodland in sort of an old road in a woodland in New Hampshire. And this was one where I drew everything on the plate with a brush, and then some places I went in and scratched out lines, so you can see on some of the tree trunks over here, there's some line scratch to give them dimension or to lighten up the effect of the black a little bit. Here it's printed on black on sort of a cream color paper, and then hand colored. This print I painstakingly went through and redid it about 4 times. You can imagine how boring
Wow.
it is to do the same drawing 4 times. So then I discovered you don't just have to, I mean, some of these things would be real obvious, but
Oh, we do have a question.
oh, is there a question, somebody?
Do you see the chat?
Yes.
Oh,
Should I read it? Or do you want me-
yeah, if you can.
If you are using watercolor on the print, how does your printing paper respond? On BFK Reeves, I find the paper can't take much brushwork without getting too soft.
I find that most of the papers that are used for etching respond very well to watercolor. They have a good deal of sizing in them, so the watercolor doesn't spread out like it would on unsized Japanese paper, for instance. And in fact, I have frequently used printmaking paper as watercolor paper because I like the surface. It doesn't have a lot of roughness. So the watercolor, and I'm working on Arche or BFK Reeves or Somerset. What's another one? There's a domestic one. Give me a name. There's a really good domestic etching paper. It'll come to me, but they all seem to work really pretty well for watercolor. So what I was going to say about this one was that I discovered you don't have to print in black. You know, that should be obvious, but I printed it in green. Well, suddenly it looked, you know, these woodlands, when you're in the woods in the summer, everything looks green, you know, whether it's black or brown or anything else, everything looks green. So that sort of changed it a little bit. And then I discovered there was a kind of dark green, but if you do it with a sort of a green that has a little bit more chroma in it, it looks even better. It's more like what I was painting. So, you know, I continued doing these relief etchings, and at the time, I had a studio in Center City on 12th Street, right across from the Reading Terminal. And I started wandering around the neighborhood, and it turned out that right up the street, about a block and a half, was an old letterpress printing company. They were still in business doing letterpress. Well, they were not really a letterpress printer. They were a company that was producing plates for letterpress printing. And they had, I went in with one of my plates and said, you know, could you like this, you know, because I didn't know how they did it, but they said, oh, sure, well, let me show you this machine. So they had this wonderful machine called I can't remember the name of it, but at any rate, it had the acid, which at the time was nitric acid. And by the way, I was working, all these plates were done on zinc rather than copper. I was working, they were using nitric acid, and then on top, in this vat, on top of the nitric acid, they had this rather viscous oil. And they took my etching plate and they turned it upside down and clamped it to a device at the top of this machine, which was a turntable. They close the cover, turn it on, and there are these paddles that would splash this combination of acid and oil up on the plate. Well, the acid is heavier, so it would splash up and fall right back down. It would do its job, it would fall right back down. The oil was viscous, so it would sort of slide off the side of the cup. And thus you would get these perfect cuts where the sides sloped away just like they should be in a woodcut. They were very strong, and if you had a little tiny dot, it would print perfectly. It wouldn't break off or undercut or something like that. So furthermore, it was dirt cheap. So I would do these plates, take them to this place, get them etched, and then take them into the studio. So this was one such plate, and I don't know if you can see it with a glancing light, but it's pretty deeply embossed. You may not, yeah, you can probably see it there on the screen. Yeah. And so I could get them to etch the plates a lot deeper than I could do it by myself, with almost no effort. You can see that I down at the bottom, I did really little spatters to create that effect down at the bottom. So here are a few of these. This one printed on gray paper with brownie.
I love that.
And typically with any given image, I probably did anywhere between 3 and 8 hand-colored versions. Then going back to the Longwood Gardens Conservatory. This one was printed on a fairly good thick
Oh.
Japanese paper, and if you look at the back, you can see that the watercolor has bled through because the paper is not sized. But I also discovered these thinner papers, when they go through the press, tend to crinkle, and I got a few little wrinkles at the top and the bottom.
Oh, wow. Look at that one.
Here's another one, another version of the same thing. And then finally on the relief front, my mentor Hitoshi at the time, he had not done any relief printing, relief etching, and so he was looking at what I was doing and saying, oh, I'm going to do that too. But what he started doing was his image is wildly different than mine, sort of a conceptualist who did geometric compositions. He decided to start using wax crayons, Crayolas, as a resist, because they would resist the acid just as well as etching ground. And so I said, oh, that opens up a whole new idea about how I can be making marks. And so this is a sand pit in Maine, real romantic subject. But it was drawn directly on a zinc plate. And zinc plates have this nice, unless you polish them, they have this really nice tooth to them. And so I could draw with wax crayon directly on the zinc plate. And
And then you just put it in acid.
yeah, and then I had these
Oh, the
bitten in
letter
acid in the
press.
same way. A different version.
It captures the texture of the crayon so well.
Yeah.
Yes, it really gets this nice
It's just looks like
crayony texture.
looks like a
I-
drawing.
I haven't tried it on copper or with ferric chloride, but and I think that it might be difficult to bite deeply enough to without it undercutting.
Mm.
And you know, sort of a gray sky version. So as I mentioned before, in the late 80s, I no longer had access to the print workshop at Penn. And I was kind of busy with my business at the time, but I really wanted to, you know, a few years later, I really wanted to do some more of this same kind of work of exploring you know, variations in color situations that I could then use in my painting. And for a while, my business had a laser printer that the paper, instead of the paper going through a circuitous route like this, it went straight through. And that was really important for me because I could then print on any paper. I could print on watercolor paper. I could print on Canson or charcoal paper or any kind of paper. And so I had done a series of drawings one summer in Maine where I was sort of going around from beach to beach and finding great big rocks and doing kind of portraits of the rocks in pen and ink. And I discovered that I could scan them and then either enlarge them or reduce them, and it would give a completely different kind of look, and then print them on this printer and hand color them. So here are a few examples. I don't even know what this is. Oh, this is an antique paper called Umbria, which somebody, it's a long story, but it had been bought in about 1925 and then given to me sometime in the late 80s. And I was
You
carrying it
digitally
around.
printed it?
Pardon?
You digitally printed it.
Say,
Digitally,
digitally, yeah, yeah,
and then hand colored.
and then hand colored. So
That's so
it's just that,
interesting,
it's
digitally
not a
printing.
traditional printmaking method, but it's another way of
No,
creating
yeah.
multiples.
I just
Okay.
love the like contrast between digital print on like this ancient paper.
Here's one that's been hand colored with pastels or pastel pencils. Maybe you can move that a little bit closer.
Yeah,
and then, yeah, like that, because then I can get more light on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's see if I've got. These go together. Okay, here are a bunch that go together. So here's one of those. Here's one of those rock portraits. Different version. Yeah, done with watercolor. Here on a blue paper with, with gouache. And this idea of working on a sort of blue-gray paper, which I then took up with a lot of some work that I did as a painter later on, came from an exhibit I saw of Turner, some Turner gouache sketches from a trip he took up the Rhine and the Moselle rivers in the 1830s, early 1840s, where he did these little paintings on a kind of a handmade blue paper, and they were just magical. And I really like the color of blue, and I like the quality of gouache on the paper. So that's a theme that I kind of explored more and more. Here's another one on a pale blue paper, and again with gouache. And very often, like this one, I use the gouache in a semi-transparent mode as opposed to being completely opaque. So it's sort of have between using it like watercolor and using it as a lot of people use gouache. Another sort of portraits of almost like a still life of these rocks with seaweed growing on the characteristic bladderwort seaweed that's on all the low tide scenes in Maine. I got to be very enamored with low tide in Maine. It happens twice a day, and every time it's like magic just happened. I can't describe it. Here, working with pastel pencil again on a gray paper, and kind of almost a night scene on a dark brown paper. And then one finally on this is the only one I still have of these, but of a waterfall in our area in Maine. So that was that. I could go on with these hand-colored prints for a long time, but I will just do one very small thing, which is that at some point, I decided that it would be fun to go through my collection of old prints and cut them up and do some little small vignettes. They were proofs that were sitting in my drawer and weren't likely to go anywhere. And so I was just having fun. Those are all etchings, obviously, just plain line etchings. Relief etching. Another line etching. And another relief. And then a tiny little dry point done of a scene in Scotland. So the question is, how did I get from this to what you're seeing behind me? The interesting question. Well, after around 2000, when I did those hand-colored digital prints, I again sort of put aside any printmaking tendencies until roughly 2015, and that was because this wonderful resource opened in the basement of the same building that I have my studio, the Second State Press. You opened in 2010. So it was down there and I wasn't really kind of aware of it for a while. And then, I had done some drawings from a trip to Japan in 2010 where I was looking at all these wonderful gnarled roots and trunks and so forth in kind of Japanese temple gardens. And so I had been doing, rocks, rockscapes, rock portraits, rock still lifes, all these these huge rocks for a long time. And I said, well, let's try a different part of nature. So I started doing drawings of these gnarled roots and so forth, little brush and ink drawings, sort of as it was kind of an homage to Japanese brush painting, I guess. So, although of course there looked nothing like it. And when I had those drawings done, I liked the drawings, but I said, gee, these would really look nice if I did them as aquatints, and I could have this like rich blackness that only an aquatint gives. So I went down to the Second State Press and I said, I want to join, and can somebody help me with this? Well, of course, since the late 80s, when I last printed, all the technology has changed. Nobody's using solvents anymore. Nobody's using acids anymore. Zach Lindenberger, one of the founders, took me, took me by the hand and said, okay, this is what you need to do. So he actually did a little test plate for me. It came out exactly the way I wanted to look. And so I said, okay, show me how to do that. So he did. And I did a suite of 8, small, about 7 by 8 inch aquatints. And they turned out just the way I wanted. And I have not hand colored any of those. I just like the look of the gnarled roots and so forth. So then I started collecting a lot of photographs of other, tree roots, tree trunks, tree this, tree that, all these things that I thought were really interesting to look at. And from that group of photographs, in the winter of 2018, I did about 40 small 8x8 and 7x10 inch drawings. And they were done on that antique Umbria paper that I showed you. Here's one of them. And a really good friend of mine, Nick Coviello, unfortunately is no longer with us, but he had given me a set of brush tip archival ink markers. And so I decided to play with those, and I really liked the way that I could use them, and you know, I didn't have to keep dipping them in ink and so forth. I just draw and draw and draw. And so I did a lot of those drawings. And in them, I left a lot of little white flecks in the black areas because I thought that they sort of livened up the black more. And when I had done a lot of them, I was thinking, well, maybe these would look really good if they were, say, twice the size or something like that. And at the time, my son was working for a company that had a big inkjet printer, and so he printed me a couple of examples. I'd scan them, send him the files, and he printed me a couple of examples on a Japanese paper that I gave him, because at the time I had this idea of making them into woodcuts using the traditional Japanese method of gluing a drawing face down on a block of wood and then cutting it from the back. Well, when I got them back, I said, you know, I am never going to be able to do this. I don't have the skill. And anyway, I'm not going to get it to look exactly like the drawing, which is what I wanted. So I did a little bit more searching around and was talking to my friend Nick, and he said, you know, there's this piece of equipment they have at NextFab, which is a Philadelphia makerspace, and maybe you should investigate whether that can cut your wood blocks for you. And so I went to them, I talked to them, I joined NextFab. It's a great resource for all kinds of things, you know, metalwork, computer boards, you know, sewing, you name it, wood shop, you name it. They've got something that can do it, 3D printing, whatever. And so I took a course on how to use this laser cutter, and I decided to make my images about 18 inches wide from an 8-inch drawing. And so I cut blocks using a laser cutter,
Oh, wow.
which look exactly like the drawing. Here you see a lot of very white looking areas, and that's because when you cut the block, unlike that machine I was telling you about to cut my relief etching plates, the laser cutter cuts straight down into whatever you're trying to cut, and so very small details aren't strong enough to withstand the pressure of the etching press, which is how I was printing my prints. So I discovered that I could do most of the job, the finer details and so forth, with the laser cutter. But big broad areas very often would print because the roller was just soft enough to go down and hit them. So those light areas you're seeing are places that I hand carved out after the fact. And so I did 10 of these this size, and then I did 10 that were about 10 by 18 inches, or 12 by 18 inches. I can't remember the exact size. When I was done with all my blocks being cut, and I pulled some child proofs, I pulled very small additions. In fact, my additions are 2. I have additions of 2 of traditional looking prints, you know, signed and everything, just like you do a traditional looking print. But I really was more interested in using the prints again for exploring my painting imagery. And there were, so I'm going to show you a fair number of the paintings that I've been working on with these prints. But also, as you can see from behind me, I've been using the prints to create pieces that are almost entirely abstract. Now, when you look at the original prints, you can see the trees, you can see the gnarled roots. Some of them are more abstract than others, but in almost all cases, you can make out the image that you're looking at, and it kind of makes sense. I decided I don't want it to make sense anymore. You know, as a representational image, I want to reconstruct it so that it has bits and pieces of things that you can say, well, what is that? What is that? But overall, the image looks to be very, very abstract and lively. And the other thing that I liked about cutting them up was that I could take multiple prints to make something bigger. And when I did that, I ended up with repetition of various objects within the print, sometimes in a very obvious way and sometimes in a much less obvious way. So I don't know if you want to, well, let me actually go to one other thing first. So where did this idea come from? Well, let's go back to what I was using to create those relief etchings I showed you earlier. So this is a photo collage. And during this period, I was doing a lot of this. I didn't have a wide angle lens, which didn't distort the things a lot. So I was taking multiple images and then collaging them together like this, mostly as reference for work, the painting work or drawing work that I was doing. And this was what I used to do those relief etchings that I showed you before. So at some point I think it was about in 1976 or something, I said, well, gee, I could use that as an end in itself. So I had a lot of these photographs, and sometimes when the photographs in themselves were kind of abstract, like beach rocks, which is what this is, I would cut them up and put them together in other ways. And you know, the image is interesting to look at as an image, but you can't really tell what it is. Some of them have a little bit more reference than the others. In some of them, I would take one image and put it together with another image, which was upside down to that image. Here's a good example of that. You know, two seascapes put together upside down. So that's kind of where ultimately where the idea, I guess, for this is sort of stewed in the back of my mind, although frankly, I'd forgotten about that when I discovered these in one of my print drawers the other day. And I said, oh yeah, I was doing that. And it was kind of like, okay. So anyway, I started cutting them on prints, and I don't know if you want to just wander around with me.
Yeah. I just took it off.
Yeah.
It'll live.
Yeah. So you know, so here are some examples. I started out by doing a lot of these fan-shaped compositions, by cutting wedges and putting them together. And originally they were, they came to a point down here, but at some point I decided, well, I really like cutting out the bottom and making it more of a, kind of the way that one would paint, that paintings were done on Japanese fans historically. Then I started saying, well, I've got something that comes around, why don't I go all the way around? So that resulted in these things that I ended up calling saw blades, and it was kind of fortuitous that some of the pieces just fit together like this with this jagged edge. And I was going to trim them to be completely smooth on the outside, and I decided I really like that jagged edge.
I like that idea of a saw blade.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So here's another one, and here, this one is one of the rare ones that I've done where I've put it together from several different woodcut images. So this is one, this is another one, this is still another one. I think this is another one altogether. So you still get some repeats like this, and you get this and this are sort of a repeat and so on. So, but fewer of the repeats that you get in other ones. If we go over here, this is one that printed on a tan etching paper. The first thing is that I instead of cutting them straight on the edges, I put in these curves, and you can see these repeated elements like this, or you see this thing repeating itself. But each time they come around, they're just slightly different. Here it is one way, here it is another way. Here it is when the print has been turned, sideways. Here it is the tail end of it. So you're getting these kind of repetitions that are sometimes fairly exact and sometimes are almost random. So let's go over here. Turn off the HVAC system. So here are some, I've done many examples of these. So there's just a few of them up on my studio walls today. These are fairly simple ones that are put together, just two parts, two mirror images. So they're very Rorschach-y kind of. Others you could see are put together in strips with these thin pieces of Japanese paper, and bookbinding adhesive that I use. So I did a lot of these friezes, some of which I'm leaving and some of which I'm painting into. And then finally, go back to the idea of painting again. And here, instead of just hand coloring the prints, I'm really working to turn them into paintings in their own right. And so here on the floor next to me, and you can see a number of these, and I'll just walk down the row. A number of these paintings, these two are the same, but colored in different ways and rotated. Most of them are done for their purely abstract qualities, but here's one that I kind of turned into a landscape. Can't get away from it. In some of them, I'm going back and working with black into what would have been a flat color area or a mostly flat color area, using the same kinds of marks that I used to make the original drawing. And here you see the image is the same, but they've been treated in very different ways. If we look up here at the top, these are just two pieces put together, but they're painted in ways that really take out most of the symmetry. Here we have two paintings that are just full prints put together, but here they're put together top to top, and here they're put together base to base, and then of course treated in a very different way. So I started painting on circles, cutting circles out of my prints and painting into them because, you know, I discovered, of course, with the square prints, I can turn them upside down, I can turn them on one side or another, but if I do it on a circle, I can put it in any orientation I want and, you know, turn it any amount I want. So some of them I was, again, enjoying, like here, getting sort of a landscapey kind of, you know, sky, earth kind of thing. Or here, how light looks coming through trees. But others are really very abstract. And I started using a lot of these little kind of like annual rings on a tree, painting into them. And then finally, I discovered that I really liked the fan-shaped images that I was doing by cutting them up, but I decided to just go with cutting up fans out of single prints. And I could, of course, turn the prints upside down or in different ways. So in general, some of these are pieced, but most of them are from a single print, working with gouache, or in this case, watercolor and gouache. Down here, just watercolor. Here I'm working with something called Caran d'Ache, which is a colored pencil that then dissolves with water. And so in this case, I colored with the colored pencil and then put damp paper towels over it, so it blurred just a little bit the color. So I think and some of them are just fun, you know, a rainbow 5 times.
I'm gonna go with this.
So I think that's pretty much it, you know. That's what I do with all those extra prints that I have, and then I make more prints and do even more with them. So
That's amazing. Are there any questions for John? Realizing today too, I wore a printed dress that matches.
Yeah.
right.
Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask in person, or you can always type in the chat.
Can you talk more about this, like big jump from like landscape work to that's like pretty representational to this more abstract work?
Yeah, so the question is, you know, how the transition happens from a landscape, from a purely representational landscape mode of working to something that's more abstract.
Or like just your process through it?
Okay. Well, conceptually, that process happened because actually from fairly early on, because I was attracted to landscapes which were very abstract in themselves. So I really did a lot of landscapes in the far west. I did a lot of landscapes at low tide where people would look at the landscape and say, well, what is that? You know, they weren't familiar with what it was. And I was kind of interested in the abstract qualities that were inherent to the landscape, but they were always recognizable as landscapes. Then sometime in the early, I think about 25 years ago or so,
I'm just gonna put this
Um,
down.
about 25 years ago or so, maybe it would be better over
Yeah,
there.
sure, we
Let's
can
go
go back
there where there's more light. I think about 25 years ago, I started getting very interested in objects, individual objects in the landscape, and particularly in Maine, which is a glaciated landscape. There are a lot of what are called glacial erratics, which are rocks that are picked up by the glacier someplace and flop down someplace else. And they always look kind of out of place. And some of them are just huge. There's one near us that must be almost as tall as this room. It's sitting on it's called Balance Rock because it's sitting, it looks like you could just push it into the lake, but of course you can't. And so I got really interested in, you know, these big monumental things. And I was also thinking a lot about time. I was illustrating geology books at the time, and I was thinking about geological time and stuff like that, and you know, kind of musing about time. I was getting older, thinking about time, and so you know, gradually these rocks took over my work, and some of those images that I did, which I have them in my drawers here, but they were getting kind of fairly abstract. And then I think the real turn toward this work came when, as I explained in my earlier on, when I took that trip to Japan. I was looking at all these gnarled roots and so forth, and you know, when you sort of go in and you crop them, you kind of say, well, what is that? You know, it's like they have these, they almost look like hills and valleys and landscapes themselves, or they can look like very figurative, depending on the quality of the bark and so forth. So that's when I started doing those drawings, and then you know, I can show you more of these drawings, but they you know, some of the drawings were pretty specific. You know, it's a tree trunk, tree roots, or like this.
Do you still
And-
have all the plates for
Hmm?
these, or do you destroy them?
These are
Oh,
just
these are
drawings. These are
drawings.
just
Oh,
drawings.
okay,
Yeah,
got it.
these are just done with pen and ink.
I see.
And you know, so here's one that's, you know, you can kind of, you tell what it is, but it's already getting more abstract. And if you were to take this and crop a piece out of it, well, what is it? You know, so that's in essence kind of what I was doing with the prints. And then if you look at these drawings, they have a lot more kind of levels of, that might not be a good example. Let me find one. They have a certain amount of gray in them. And when I turned them into prints, I wanted it black, black, black. And so I did, you know, before I cut my blocks, I scanned them in Photoshop, and then I put them in Illustrator and turned them into an Illustrator file, which is what
Right.
you need to cut the blocks. And so they're either black or they're white, they're nothing in between. And so that made them even a little bit more abstract. If you go down, you see my show downstairs? Okay, well, after this, we can go down if you want. The show, in the show on one side are just the straight wood cuts, and you can see that they're pretty representational. And then on the other side are things kind of like this. So that's kind of, does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
some of these look like you said that there was like a history of biology, and some of them look so much like we took like a cross section and looked under a microscope.
Yeah, they do have a,
Like,
they do have
sorry.
a quality. I really thought of going back and looking at some of that imagery.
Yeah.
Ironically, way back at the very beginning of my career and before I was studied art, I was in high school, I was doing drawings for a neuroscience lab
Oh, cool.
at a university. And I was very taken with those, with the photomicrographs that they did of, brain sections.
Sure.
And I assisted, unfortunately, this spring gave it to Thomas Jefferson University Library, but I had a book which was a brain atlas. And a brain atlas is a way for scientists to find very particular places in the brain of whatever it is. And this happened to be a part of a cat's brain, which is an animal that was used a lot in neuroscience studies. These plates were, when I was, I think I might have been in college when I was working for that lab still and doing it, but I printed, they had this special thing that was designed by the Army, I think, for printing aerial photographs.
Sure.
It's a pretty complicated process, but this sort of automated it. And so I printed most of the plates for this atlas, so I got to know them really well. And then, between college and grad school, I had a studio in New York, and I was using those plates as images for my paintings. I was doing airbrush abstractions of these sort of biomorphic abstractions that came from those. So, yeah, it's all connected.
Would you ever like license your work to be used on cover of Nature magazine?
I
Like a science magazine?
actually one of those paintings was purchased by a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist at Harvard, who then put it on the cover of his book called The Dream Drugstore. And
You got anything for it?
well, actually, he thought because he had bought the painting, he could just use the image. And I said, no, pay me. So he sent me to the publisher and we worked out a deal. That's that, yeah.
Because my dad's a scientist.
Oh,
and
yeah?
he's always talking to me about helping him like with covers for
Mhm.
when he's published. But I think that your work lends itself much more to that. So if you don't mind, I would like to tell him about you, if you don't mind.
Well, when I had my company, we had we sort of had a regular gig with two scientific journals. One was published by the American Society of Microbiology, ASM Press, and the other one was a journal called Physiology. And the art in most scientific journals is just awful. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets the idea across, but it's not well done artistically. And so when these two scientists at Yale wanted to start this journal, Physiology, they asked me, would you basically redo all the art for all the articles and do a cover every second month or something that came out. So we did that for a bunch of years. And then when I wound down my company, I gave it to one of the people that took over for me. So, but they were, those were kind of semi-abstractions. We would take some image and from one of the articles and work with it to create some sort of attractive looking cover. But it was always pretty scientifically plausible, if you want to put it that way.
Well, John, thank you so much for taking time to go through your whole process with us and share this incredible history. It was really just so amazing to see from these photographs. Like I haven't seen those before. Just to what you've come up with here. And I do encourage everyone to come check out the show in right outside of Second State Press in the basement of the Crane Arts building. And it'll be up until the 31st of October.
That's right.
So there's plenty of time to get over here.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, and we will say goodbye on, is that like another chat in there?
I see.
I can't ever see them on my phone.
It says, thank you, John, a wonderful opportunity to catch up on your
I
work.
can't hear.
Thank you, John, a wonderful opportunity to catch up on your work.
Oh,
And that's from,
yeah,
That is from Nana. And
yeah,
then
I know.
it looks like there's one more person on here. I don't know if we should.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.